Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. And just like that, we're celebrating 100 episodes of School and Around. Thank you so much for joining us and listening in on all our conversations with our amazing guests. And today's episode is no different, a chat with someone who is on a mission to transform lives of students. If you haven't already, make sure to enter our 100th episode giveaway for lots of great goodies. The link is in the show notes. And now you can follow us on Instagram. Just follow Schoolin' Around and you can connect with us there, leave us comments, send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thank you for listening. Enjoy the conversation. Even with all the attention to student mental health these days, we are still navigating the challenges. The work often starts with building a positive school culture where students feel safe, though. So today we are joined by Jared Scott, an award-winning speaker, author, and founder of the Culture Shift Tour. And Jared's mission has transformed over 1,000 schools by empowering students to lead with purpose, resilience, and hope. His work sheds light on the power of leadership and mental health as keys to lasting change. We are so excited to have you here. Welcome, Jared.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Jared, I would love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit to our audience and talk a little bit about maybe just like the crux of where this work began.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jared Scott. I'm a public speaker. I'm also a hip hop artist, husband, father, counselor. Those are my main titles, but I always tell people I'm a student first, like lifelong learner. Everywhere that I go, I'm really just listening. I often tell people I'm not even really a speaker in that sense. I'm a professional listener because I was the shy kid growing up. So this is not something that I asked to be or even wanted to be. I just noticed that there was something missing. Every time somebody came to our school to speak or preach or teach, they really were just telling a story like, I did it, so you could do it too. And I was always sitting out in the audience like, but how? Like, I need steps. I need somebody to tell me the logistics of this, What do I need to do next? And start small, not just show me the end, but show me the journey. And so I was like, we have different pressures as kids. Sitting out in the audience when I was 15 years old, I remember thinking, this is so unrelatable. Like, my parents didn't even have the internet. And I have Instagram and Facebook and all this stuff already. And the speaker that day at our school was talking about magazines. And this was like, this kept happening, It was just like there was a big gap and misunderstanding. And so one day there was a speaker that offered for us to come up afterwards and tell him how to fix the program because he actually recognized that it was unrelatable. Like, nobody was listening to him to the point that he stopped the program. And he's like, if this is so boring, unrelatable, or something you've seen before, then I need somebody to come up afterwards and tell me how to fix it. And through that vulnerability, he won my respect, even as the shy kid. I waited till everybody else left because I didn't want to be seen talking to anybody. But I went up to him afterwards and I told him the truth. I was like, it was boring, man. You were talking about magazines. He was talking about like MTV and stuff and music videos and all this stuff. And I was like, we have social media and we need to know how to deal with that. It's a different pressure. We have different pressures. So we feel disconnected. We feel different. We feel misunderstood. And he was like, well, what should we do? And first thing that popped to my mind was just let students tell their own stories. Like, let students tell you how they're dealing with their pressures, and we could go from there. What if you gave students an opportunity to talk about this? And I thought he was going to dismiss me like most adults did, like, good idea, just pat me on the back, send me on my way. But he really listened to me. He asked deeper questions to get deeper answers. He got me thinking about it. And then he invited me out to this thing. It was called Be the Difference Day in my town that he was speaking at. And he asked me if I wanted to get up on stage and tell my story. Now, of course, I did not want to do that at all, but I did have a story. And, at the time I had lost a friend to suicide and my town was dealing with an epidemic. We had 12 students in our district attempt to take their life in one school year. 2 of them were friends of mine, and our town didn't know how to deal with that. I come from a town that doesn't have a lot of mental health resources. Even to this day, it's hard to go do programs there because it's hard for them to admit that they actually have that problem, And so I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do, but I just said yes. I said, okay. I knew I had something to say. And my idea was that I could just get up on stage and at least tell people how I'm feeling about what happened to my friend and how I'm dealing with it, even though I wasn't really dealing with it the correct way. I was kind of distracting myself, doing everything I could not to think about it, but I was just honest about that. And the one thing that I did do that I still look back to this day and say that that was pretty positive for me to do was I wrote a song for my friend that passed away.
Mm.
And I expressed those emotions through the music. And I feel like that song is what started this whole thing for me, because if I didn't have the song, a way to express myself, I don't know if I'd have been able to get up there and articulate it correctly. So I just got up there and I sang the song. And then I told them why I wrote the song. And that music was like medicine to me because it made me feel like I wasn't the only one going through what I was dealing with. You know, I could listen to my favorite artists, and I don't know the artist personally, but I could relate to them through the feelings and the emotions and the music. And that makes me feel better. So maybe it'll make you feel better. You know, that's how this whole thing
Mhm.
started. And so I did that. And afterwards, 50 plus kids come up. You know, everybody's, I want to tell you my story. And I had this
Mhm.
little girl, I'll never forget her. She was the first person to tell me that my story saved her life. She was like, I'm the shy kid. And seeing you up on stage, have the courage and the confidence to tell your story, just inspired me to tell you mine. And she told me that she was thinking about taking her life. But
Mhm.
hearing the story about my friend that lost her life saved her life. She's going to tell somebody now. And she told me, and then she told her parents. And it became this thing. I was just like, man, maybe this is our story, you know, like maybe we're all dealing with this human story and we all feel disconnected, but it's really just invisible walls that we're putting up because we think that vulnerability is a weakness, but in reality, it might actually be the thing that's going to set us free.
Mhm.
And if this is all our story and we're all connected, that we're actually all in this together, but we're just suppressing and projecting these emotions onto one another. Now, as a kid, I didn't know the language of this. So I didn't know how to say the things that I was feeling. So I decided I'm going to go back to school. When I graduate high school, I'm going to school for psychology. I'm getting a degree to figure out how to say these things correctly on stage, to give real answers and be the person that I always wanted to see come to my school. You
Mhm.
know, like I told you, I'm out in the crowd saying, but how? I'm like, I'm going to go figure out how. And then I'm going to come back and this is what I'm going to do. But I never really left. I just kept speaking in schools. I realized early on that, man, I was probably trauma bonding with kids, you know, just making them not feel alone in the moment. And so that was really what pushed me to go get a degree. And I'm still in school to this day. I'm just going to be a lifelong learner and learn as much as I can to give better answers. So that way we could actually heal and not
Mhm.
be a bunch of like halfway healed people helping other people halfway heal, which is the
Yeah.
definition of trauma bonding, right? And I just see that everywhere I go with a lot of speakers and stuff. So I just that was my motivation behind this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of name a couple of things. Number one, the power of art in
Mm-hmm.
helping name emotions and put language to emotions that we may not understand. And I think that that's really powerful. As a former like middle school teacher, you know, often I had students that really like clung to poetry or clung to like different avenues of art because it really like it spoke to them. It felt like that was their avenue to express themselves, to articulate emotions that they didn't have the words for necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really powerful for just for you to identify at that age of like, I don't know how to speak these words, but I know how to like sing a song that means something to me.
Yeah.
And I love that the guy didn't dismiss you. It's just like, oh, this kid and his like song, like, right? I love that there was an adult that saw you. And I mean, that's just like an encouragement to adults to sort of see past that, just the, you know, to see kids for where they're at, to see students for where they're at and not to dismiss those things. And then the other thing I love that you talked about just like how when you named your vulnerability, it provided an avenue for other people to see, oh, this person can be vulnerable. I could be vulnerable too.
Yeah.
And sometimes that modeling that needs to happen. I mean, you were just a kid when you did it, but now as an adult, I'm sure that you see the same of just how that can be really powerful for kids to see that modeled when maybe they haven't seen it modeled before. And that's a sort of an urge to educators, how powerful that is to like when there's a way to model vulnerability in some way, whether it's just like identifying I make mistakes too, or things like that. I mean, that's surface level, but when it comes to sort of these bigger things, how important it is for them to see that vulnerability.
I think it's the only way to actually get them to listen. We have what's called those mirror neurons in our brains that when somebody's being real and authentic, we can actually tell, and then we lean in and actually listen if that's there. That's why we have that saying, real recognizes real. We always speak the way that we feel, and that's why we have those sayings. But they're more important than you think, because if you're pretending to be this perfect professional teacher all the time and you want them to listen to who you're pretending to be, it actually doesn't work that way. You're actually repelling them. They're going to
Mhm.
rebel against you now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because I do think it is this, and you even talked about this feeling misunderstood by these adults, right? That they didn't
Mhm.
understand the world that you lived in and how
Right.
that's so important. I mean, I think I remember at one point in my career as as an educator, I got to this point where I realized I'm further from their age now, and I have I was teaching middle schoolers. I was like, I can't relate to their world as much as I used to, like when I first started teaching. Like I had an
Right.
understanding, but like the older I got, the further I was of a generation from what they are experiencing, whether that's the crux of social media and having access to cell phones and all that kind of stuff. I think was just it's harder and harder the longer that you're like the more that you separate that. So it's important to identify like, hey, I don't understand. Even I always just felt like I'm like, hey, I don't get the world that you live in because it's different than mine. But it's okay for me to admit that instead of pretending like I know
Yeah,
it.
and tell me how it feels to be you. That's what I
Yeah.
always tell them. It's like I'll never know what you're going through, what you're going home to. I mean, you can tell me and I can put myself in your shoes and have empathy for you, but I can never put myself in your head and see life the same way that you see life. And so at the
Yeah.
end of the day, you have to tell me how it feels to be you. I tell you how it feels to be me, and we relate to each other through those mutual feelings, and that's how we build relationships, get connected, and push back.
Yeah.
And so like if you're not telling me how it feels and you're not talking about your feelings, then we're not fully connected.
Yeah.
And you still feel like a stranger to me, and stranger equals danger. So you're like a threat to me, and I'm going to keep my distance.
Yeah. Well, and we know that if students don't feel safe, they're not going to learn. And so
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about the work that you do on the Culture Shift Tour is kind of unique in the sense of it isn't just you going and speaking to a school, but it's more than that. So I'd love for you
Yeah.
to share a little bit about that and how you get students involved in this work of shifting the culture in their school.
Yeah, it's not about like giving up control. That's what I always have to tell the schools, because they're all focused on top down. And I understand that like top down works. I mean, I understand that we have to take care of our teachers in order to really take care of our students. I understand that. But it's really about giving students a role. So that way, when they build the culture, they'll take responsibility and ownership, and they'll actually grow it and protect it. It's as simple as this. You may have tried these things at your school before, but it was your idea. And since it was your idea, it's not cool. I mean, period. And they didn't name it, they didn't take ownership of it, they're not going to protect it. And they don't feel like it was even their voice, even though you did it for their expression.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing as just having kids. You don't want to do everything for your kids. You want to guide them through the process so they actually learn and grow and become,
Mhm.
right? And I think sometimes we don't look at our students the same way that we look at our children, even though they are like we love them like our children. I mean, I've worked with thousands, literally thousands of teachers, and it's like you have 25 kids in this class, and they're your kids too. And you look at them like your kids. You go home and you think about them at night, like you love them like they're your kids. You also have to help them grow like they're your kids. You don't want to do everything for them or you will hinder them. And so the Culture Shift Tour is about a process that we walk through together, hand in hand. And we let them lead the way and we just steer the ship from time to time, right? And we get community buy-in and we bridge the gap between the school and the parents. And that's the biggest part of the culture shift to me that really makes it work. It's like the bow on top,
Mhm.
the cherry on top. I mean, that's really what makes the difference. And this whole thing was created through a process of me learning through failure. I first started going to schools, just did a keynote, realized that nothing's really changing. We're only changing the climate. We're only changing the way people feel for a few hours or days if it was a really good speech, right? But things go back to normal. Things go back to the culture, the way that things are done around here all the time. No matter how good of a speech, I don't care how good of a speaker you are, things are going to go back to normal. It takes consistent, persistent, and relentless action to create real lasting change. So I was like, all right, we have to take action. How do we take action? Well, let's actually just do the work that we talk about today. So instead of me talking to you about how to remove negative emotions from traumatic experiences so you can see yourself for who you are and actually create a solution moving forward and see it and believe in it, let's just go in the next room and let's do a 2-hour workshop and actually do activities to break this thing down. And if we need to cry, we're going to cry today together. If we need to forgive some people, we're going to forgive mom and dad and forgive ourselves for believing the things that came out of these hurtful situations. We're going to do it today. We're going to replace the lies with the truth so that way we actually have some powerful I am statements to believe about ourselves. We're going to take pictures of those and put them on our backgrounds of our phones, and we're going to repeat them to ourselves every day. We're going to set reminders in our phones. We're going to, let's do the work that's going to set up
Mm-hmm.
success in the future for us. And then we got to a point where the kids were coming up with really good solutions. So the first part of the leadership class is them removing the negative emotions so they can see the qualities and characteristics of a leader within themselves, so they believe in themselves and the change they're trying to make. And then once they can see clearly, then it's like, all right, let's actually write down the solutions. Let's come up with some movements, some names for movements, some after school groups, whatever it is that you want that fixes these challenges that you were dealing with. And so they started to do that, and we've started to have really good success with that. But the problem was it ended at that. They were just good ideas. Nothing
Mm-hmm.
got done. So it was like, all right, let's add the next part. The next part, let's take these ideas to the staff. We'll have a staff workshop. Let's put the staff through pretty much the same process as the kids, which is it's basically trauma-focused therapy. Remembering the traumatic experience, remembering the negative emotions and feeling them, replacing the negative emotions, identifying the lies, replacing the lies, and believing something better for yourself. I mean, it's a process, right? And so we put the staff and the students through the same thing where they get to this point where they can actually see this solution as possible. And then we ask the staff, all right, which one of these is actually doable? What can we actually do here? And we pick like the top 2 or 3. And then we take that to a community night where we present the top 3 ideas to the parents. We also give the parents a keynote to understand what everybody else went through today to get to this point, right? And so once everybody can see this common goal, and the goal is the highest possible good for everybody, meaning that if we actually create this, everyone wins, people get behind that and push,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And for the longest time, it really was, we would get to the point of creating it, but the school would be like, we don't have the funds for that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the time for that. We don't have the space for that. And so that's when we started to add in the broader community. We get nonprofits involved. We get people that just like, we'll pay for all of it. Or we got t-shirt company. We'll print all the t-shirts. We'll do this. We'll do that. And when you bridge that gap between the parents and the teachers and the educators and the whole admin, like the whole district, it becomes not just shifting the culture within the schools anymore. We're starting to shift the culture within the whole community. And we've
Mm-hmm.
had culture shifts, movements that have started as just in school, 15 kids, a little movement that turned into full blown nonprofits that ended up raising tens of thousands of dollars to give back to the school for more mental health resources. So once we've seen some of those things be possible, it's like now we have a blueprint. And so
Yeah.
we've created what we call the Culture Shift Blueprint. It's a whole document we put together of how some schools have done what they've done. And we just give that out everywhere we go.
Yeah. Well, and that it's really powerful when it starts with the students, I think, because it is them identifying this is the need we have. This is the, this is the area that will help us the most. And sometimes that's really hard to like embrace for the district. And I think even you identifying the different hurdles that districts face, whether it's like getting the staff buy-in. I mean, we talk a lot about that around here, and what we do is helping to get the staff buy-in to new structure, new processes, new procedures. And then it's also then getting the whole district and the community. And I feel like when you have the community buy-in, then it becomes this expectation. And it's really understanding how much the community can invest in the school. Like, I mean, honestly, that's really what we always want to see, right? We want to see the community so invested in what's happening in the school because they're invested in the future of these students. And so,
And the
I love,
schools are the heart of the community.
yeah,
And sometimes people don't realize that you know, until you show them.
yeah,
That's really the culture is all about proof to people. I say this in my presentation all the time. I believe this because I have proof, and here's the proof. Like here's what we did. And so a lot of the times, beginning of the program, the way that we start, even before I get there, we're having a bunch of Zoom calls and stuff leading up to the culture shift, and we'll ask the staff, to come up with a whole list of challenges that they believe are the number one challenges on their campus. And then when we get there and we do the work with kids and the leadership, they have to do the same thing. And you'd be amazed at how different these
Mm,
are. Like the staff could have swore that these were the top 5 things the kids were dealing with. And then over here, completely things they did not even think that the kids were in that community were dealing with. They didn't even know.
yeah.
It's all based on how many things were said, how many amount of times. So it's a statistical thing, So it's
Yeah.
like if all the kids said this many times, these were the top ones, and all the staff said this, and these were the top ones. And 9 times out of 10, they're different,
Man.
And people would swear that that was it.
Well, and it's all about your own perception and your own experience too, right?
Exactly.
What you perceive as an issue for students may be very different than what they're actually their lived experience. And so, I mean, you kind of named it from the beginning, right? Like students, when you're a student, your lived experience is your lived experience, right? Like maybe it's hard to relate to other people, or it's hard for other people to relate to you because they may have that misunderstanding, whether it be generational gaps, right? Or other gaps that teachers live in. I live in a urban area, or a big metro area, so sometimes teachers don't live in the community, they live somewhere else, and commute to teach, and so sometimes they're not living, they don't understand how
Yep.
what the students are experiencing. So I think that's important to name. So you say you worked with hundreds, thousands of schools and students. I would love for you to kind of name a little bit. And we have many educators that listen to this podcast, whether it be district leaders or building leaders or classroom teachers. I would love for you to talk a little bit about patterns and trends you see among the youth that you work with, like maybe identifying what are some things that you're seeing that are
Mhm.
specific issues that maybe are resonating across the country.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things right now is this lack of identity. Like we don't know who we are or who we even want to be.
Mm,
And we have the device, we have the phone, and we have social media, so we are distracted, and we do lose our identity a little bit through that device. I tell people all the time, I hate to be like a negative guy about social media, so I don't say it's negative or positive, I say it's powerful. It's up to you how you use it and how much you use it, but it's definitely a pattern that I'm seeing. Kids have an average of 12 hours plus of screen time. And this is something I do at all my programs in the leadership classes. I ask them to pull out their phone and check their screen times. So I'm not making that number up. It seems very, very high, but it is what it is. I mean, I'm talking an average of 12 to 14 hours a day of screen time. And so pretty much anytime they're not at school, they're on their phones. And sometimes even when they are at school. And what they're on their phones scrolling through is a bunch of uncertainty. They're making a bunch of decisions subconsciously that they're not even realizing. They're asking themselves a bunch of questions like, should I be like them? Should I walk like them? Should I dress like them? Should I be them? Should I be somebody else? And that's bringing a lot of uncertainty about themselves. And they are so focused on everybody else that they're forgetting to get to know themselves, which is actually their job in their childhood, to get to know who they are, who they want to be, what they like, what they don't like, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, all these things. And they're really just so focused on everybody else's highlighted life that's not even real. And they're comparing themselves to that, and they're losing their identity and their sense of self. And you'll ask kids, 16, 17, 18 years old that are about to graduate. And I've seen the trend over the past 14. This is my 15th year of doing this. And every time I talk with seniors, I always ask the questions, what's the plan? And they used to have a plan. Sometimes this upsets people when I talk about it. I get it. They're young. They might not have it figured out, and that's great. Most people don't at that age. I'm not saying figured out. I'm just saying have a single clue. You know what I'm saying? Like a
I mean, I
single.
had a plan, but I don't know whether it was a good plan.
Yeah, it don't even have to be a good plan. And I do actually. It's funny. I tell them that it does not even have to be a good plan. But the thing is, some of them don't even know, what they're going to do tomorrow. Like, it's just like there's the future doesn't exist. And the reason why I believe is because when you're surrounded by negative emotions and you're in negative situations, sometimes those emotions will cloud your vision. That's why we say things like blind with anger, right? So sad that you can't see tomorrow, or you don't have the resources. So here's an example, like say you're living in poverty and you don't have the resources, you're worried if you're going to eat tonight. That's what you're worried about. You're not worried about tomorrow. Somebody could ask you what you're going to do in 5 years. You're like, I'm not thinking 5 years, 5 weeks, 5 days. I'm thinking about today, right now, just getting through this right now. And so when they're surrounded by these negative emotions, it clouds their vision and they're unable to see a future version of themselves. And the problem with that is Well, there's a lot of problems with that, but the main problem is that they don't take the future version of themselves into consideration with the decisions that they're making today. And
Yeah.
so these are the kids that turn to drugs and alcohol to cope, substance abuse, or do anything, right? Instant gratification. And sometimes it's not a drug or a substance, it's the phone. So
Yeah.
they bury themselves even deeper into the distraction, and they further lose their identity because they're still not getting to know themselves. And if they don't know themselves and they're a stranger to themselves, and stranger equals danger. So in a weird way, it's like they're a threat to themselves. So then they don't want to be alone. You see how that works? Now they
Yeah.
don't want to be alone with their thoughts anymore. So they
So,
turn either deeper into the phone, or they're making sure that they are
yeah.
the life of the party. They're around people all the time, always having people over at the house, never alone to ask themselves deeper questions, to get deeper answers, or actually
Yeah.
know themselves. And it just becomes a very slippery slope till one day you get asked what you're going to do after you graduate. That's coming up in a couple months, and they're just like, it was like the first time that they ever thought about it, and they have
Yeah.
no clue. And then the anxiety of that unknown, of the uncertainty that brings fear, it
Yeah.
overwhelms them. And that's why these kids are living with, continuous panic attacks every day, because they're living with a stranger. I tell kids, you got to get to know yourself as if you have to live with you for the rest of your life, because you do. It's like when you go on a date with somebody, you want to get to know them, and you ask them a bunch of questions because you want to know if this is somebody that you would spend the rest of your life with. And yet we spend all the time with ourselves, but don't ask ourselves any
Mm.
questions.
Well, and because like that I think you could ask some adults and they would want
Oh,
to ask
yeah.
themselves their own questions, and I think it's that afraid of like that fear. And I've
Mhm.
seen that. I would see that in eighth graders getting ready for high school, like that they would have this uptick of anxiety and behavior issues and stuff because they start talking about their future, right?
Mhm.
Anytime brings up, that conversation comes up, they start panicking. And I think it grew over the years of teaching. So I can definitely see that as, talking to
There's more
seniors.
options.
Yeah.
There's actually
Or,
more things for them to do. There's more opportunities, and there's so much that they have that analysis paralysis.
oh,
There's
for
so
sure.
much opportunity. They could do anything, and it's just that freezes them in their tracks
Yeah.
because they're consuming everybody doing everything.
Oh, yes.
you
I
know?
mean, I experience that as an adult sometimes, right? Like all the different hobbies I could have, all the different things, all the different places I could travel. I can't even imagine as a kid of like knowing there's so many options and being like paralyzed of like I don't know what I want because I don't know who I am. And I don't even know who the world is telling me to be. And I'd say even in the last 5 years living through a lot of uncertainty about the world, I can't even imagine students
Yeah.
trying to navigate that as well. Like that's another layer upon all that they're experiencing.
Everything I talk about to the kids, it's like it would be it's 10 times as real to the adults. Like when I do convocations and stuff like that, and I'm speaking to adults, the reaction is even deeper because they realize that they never did any of this. I have 50+ year olds come up to me afterwards. I had this guy one time, he was 65. He came up to me afterwards in tears after a convocation, and he was like, I never wanted to be a teacher. That was the first thing he said to me. He just came up to me, gave me a hug, crying. He's like, I never wanted to be a teacher. He said, I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a painter. And then he just walked off. But you know what I'm saying? But that was vulnerable to him.
Yeah.
Like that was like, to me, it was like that touched this man in a way that he just had to admit to somebody that he didn't know who he was. So he didn't know what he wanted, just like you said. And he lived this life for so long that he chased this whole career and did this whole thing that he didn't even want to do. But he never
Yeah.
really admitted to himself or anybody else that it wasn't who he really was.
Yeah. Man, you're out there doing the like deep work, or prompting
Right.
people to do the deep work that they may be afraid to do. And I think that I appreciate you going past because like we talk about social emotional learning a lot on this podcast, and we talk a lot about the resources and screening for some social emotional issues and all that kind of stuff. But I do think there comes a point where like some of that is surface level, and it is asking kids to do some of that work and
Mhm.
prompting culture to shift that work is necessary in schools. So I really wanted to talk a little bit about because there is this balance of like there is this need to do some of that deep work within a school and having resources for students to do that. But schools really exist for that academic need. And so how do you feel like that schools can establish that balance for that academic and social emotional work?
I think it's just like everything else in life. You have to recognize the problem first, and you have to admit that there's actually a problem. We can't just pretend that the system's perfect. We know it's not. As a teacher, I feel like you show up and you have like 10 different hats that you wear. Teachers tell me all the time, well, I wasn't a counselor. I didn't go to school for counseling, but I'm counseling these kids every single day. Then they ask you to do all these different things you have to be everything for everybody, right? So that's a big part of it. That's a big part of the system, and the system being flawed. How we can do better, I think, is to be authentic about it and be honest about it, so that way we can actually make changes in the system. And so I've always just encouraged that in people to innovate. We can't not innovate. We can't not grow.
Mhm.
We can't be the same system it was 100 years ago. We got to change. Things have to change, and whenever there's something changing, there's going to have to be leaders that go first, so that other people feel safe enough to follow. So I just
Yeah.
encourage people that if they have ideas, to put those ideas into action to make real, actual change.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly sort of what your culture shift tour is about.
Right.
It's like helping take action on those ideas that students have and bring it in the community to help make that possible. Because I do think that there's many educators that probably, and I used to be one of them, that would sit and think a lot about, man, if this could be different, if this could different, if we could do this kind of thing. And the blockers of like, well, we have to get, district buy-in, and there needs to be a district policy, and there needs to be
Yeah.
funding, like
Yeah.
there has, or time, even time, like time is such a, big part of the big blocker that many educators face. It was like, there's no time to do this work. But it starts small. I think it starts where
That's the
you have
point
to
right there.
recognize, like, okay, well, here's the problem. Here's what we can do about it. And not letting that deter you. Cause I do think, and I say this knowing that there's so many educators that are out there that are really burnt out and they've been
Yeah.
doing really hard work. And so, but it does take those leaders, those other people, and it doesn't happen alone. I also think that that's sort of what I want to identify here. It's not just
Yeah.
about you coming into a school and having one powerful speech and that you've made all this change, but you actually like bringing people together to do this work.
Right. Anytime there's a problem, you have an opportunity to create a solution. Like, that's really how I see problems, as opportunities in disguise. That's really what they are. I used to go to schools, just do a keynote, and then afterwards kids would line up at the counselor's door, and the counselors would literally say, Jared, we love your program, but we don't have enough counselors to deal with 60 kids afterwards. And so, like,
Yeah.
light bulb went off. There's a problem, but there's also an opportunity for me to help fix this problem. So then we started partnering with other counselors. I went back to school so that way I could get a degree, so that way I could stay afterwards. And then when I started to stay afterwards to talk to those 50, 60 kids, I was like, we're already here. Let's do the work. We turned it into a workshop, and that's how we developed the leadership workshop. So every single
Yeah.
part of this program started out as a problem, all
Yeah.
the way down to the now Department of Education, right? We don't know if we're going to have funding for what you do anymore, Jared. Well, that's fine. We created another solution to this problem. We have this bracelet company. It's called IBIY. These bracelets have little chips in them. You scan the bracelet with your phone, and it takes you to an app, and it tells you to tell your story. You film yourself telling your story, and now your story is embedded in this band, and you pass it along to people. When they scan it, they see your story, they tell their story, it gets put underneath yours in a news feed, and it becomes this chain reaction, right? We get the data from that, so we get to see how many people have it, how many people have shared it, how many people have shared their stories. And so this is now data to get into bigger contracts and districts and stuff like that,
Mhm.
right? Because they need the data that this thing actually works. So we created a movement, tangible thing for them to see. And then now that we have this company, well, we could reach out to bigger companies and put their logo on these bracelets, and they could put their own message on them, and they could sponsor the schools, so the schools don't have to pay for what we do. And so it's like, I'm always just thinking of a new way to get around the
Yeah.
problem or the barrier of the situation, right? And so if you really believe in the change that you're trying to make, you're not going to let anything stop you from making that change.
I mean, I think that's such a powerful message to sort of like end on, because I do think that there is such a need um, for us to not give up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I always sort of felt that of like, it's really easy to throw in the towel and say like, I can't do this anymore. Right. Or just feel like that all of this is really impossible, like to make the change that students need to support student needs feels impossible many days. And there's many educators that feel that way. And I always just feel like, maybe take a break, but don't give up. And knowing that there are people out there that are looking at those things as problems to solve. I appreciate that everything that you're doing. It's really, I could probably ask you 50 more questions right now about the work that you're doing and about just all of the stories you probably have now of just communities that are changed for the better from your work and your team's work. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about how people can find you and maybe follow along with the Culture Shift Tour and learn more about you.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, www.jaredschottspeaks.com. And from there, I've linked all the social medias. So I've made it just easy and simple for you. And also, you can download what we call the Culture Shift Blueprint and the Culture Shift Worksheet. It's an identity shift worksheet. It goes through exact process that we go through with the kids. So if you're an educator, you could download that, print that out, do that with your kids. And what it really comes down to is it allows you to understand what the underlying beliefs and negative beliefs and lies that they're saying about themselves are every day, and what the opposite of those lies are, and how you can help them counteract that and actually believe in themselves and see it in them. So I just want to give one quick example. I had this one little girl that went through this process, and she had worked 3 different jobs. She woke up in the morning, helped her dad open his shop. It was a burger joint down the road. And then she would go to school. She'd go to school late every single day. The school was like, she's always late. This girl's always late. But she didn't tell them why she was late. She was just always late. And then after school, she would go to her own job, and then she'd help her dad close the burger joint at the end of the day. She went through this process. She wrote down her stories that she told herself in her head, the lies that she's believed. And one of the main lies was that she was lazy. She felt like she was lazy. Now, when we read that in the leadership class, the other kids just like couldn't believe it, because to them, she was like the hardest working kid they'd ever heard of. But to her, she could never do enough. The underlying lie was really that she was not enough, not good enough, not smart enough, not this enough, not that enough, just not enough. She didn't feel worthy of love, of anybody's approval or acceptance. And so now, having that and knowing that, the principal of that school, the teacher of that school, they see her walk in every day. They know why she might be late. They know why she might be tired, but they understand that she feels like she's just not doing enough. So used to, she'd show up, she'd be late, they'd get on her, why are you this? Why you need to do this, you need to do that. And not understanding that was feeding into that belief that she had, that she was not enough. And now they know. So now they can help her believe that she's enough and she's worthy and she's loved.
Man, that's really powerful, because it's really true. It's like when we don't have all the information, it's hard. It's without even knowing it, feeding into those thoughts and lies that student has. So
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Jared, for chatting. And this is our 100th episode, and so we're excited to be able to share it out with our audience. And but we're just so excited to have you here, and maybe we'll look forward to working with you in some capacity in the future too.
That'd be awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.